What's up guys, Carter here from Part-Time Overland, and today I'm going to be doing a 40,000 mile rundown of the General Grabber ATx. Now I've been wanting to do this review for quite some time now. In fact, I've had these tires for about 2.5 years at this point. But I wanted to give these tires some time to really wear in and run through their lifespan so I could get a lot more knowledge on how they handled over their entire lifespan, if they got any noisier, how they handled with low tread, things like that. So here we are 40,000 miles later, and it's time to dig into these tires. All right, so a little bit about these tires before we jump into the review. Now these are actually the second generation of General's all-terrain tires. The first generation was called the AT2. I actually ran that version on my old Subaru Forester and I absolutely love them. Now the biggest difference between the AT2 and now the ATx is I actually went ahead and grabbed some inspiration from, grabbed, no pun intended. They grabbed some inspiration from their X3, which is General's mud terrain tire, and specifically the sidewall. So they took pretty much what the AT2 was and added some extra sidewall, which really helped beef up the tire and make sure you have more off-road performance, as well as ensuring that these tires are not going to pop on any rocks. Now I know probably one big question on everyone's mind is, should I go with these over the KO2s? And in fact, these two tires are very, very similar. Now the reason I went with these tires specifically is I actually heard from many people, now back in the day this was talking in the Subaru community, that these tires were pretty much like KO2s but better in almost every way. First off, they're cheaper than KO2s. Secondly, I know some issues with KO2s include not being able to balance the tires. I've heard they get stiff over time, the actual rubber gets stiff, and there's just some problems with the KO2s that sort of seem to arise fairly often. Now after having driven both the AT2s as well as these ATXs for over 40,000 miles at this point, I can definitely say that these tires handle amazingly. I haven't had a direct comparison personally with the KO2s, but if it were me, I would go with these. They're pretty much like KO2s, but I think just better all around, and of course they're cheaper, which everyone likes cheap tires. Okay, we're getting up close and personal with the tires, and let's talk a little bit about what makes them so great. Now like I mentioned previously, these are an updated version of the AT2, which means they have this beefier sidewall, and that for an off-road tire is very, very important. And I'll talk about this more in a second, but these sidewalls have been very, very impressive to me. I have put them through severe abuse, as hopefully you can see. There's a lot of rock marks on there, and in the middle of nowhere, I have not popped any tires, thanks to the sidewall. The tires are 3-peak snow rated, which means they are very good in the snow, at least for an all-terrain tire, which for me is very critical as I live in Colorado, so a lot of my winter driving is in snow. On top of that, these tires have places where you can put optional studs. I'm personally not a big fan of studs, and I know studs aren't even legal in all the states, but if you do want that extra traction, these could be a very nice set of dedicated winter snow tires. Lastly, General has engineered these tires to be very good both on and off-road. Part of what makes them so good on and off-road is they're actually a 6-ply tire versus compared to, say, a KO2 is going to be an 8-ply tire. Basically, the more plies you have, the tire is going to be more durable, so I guess you could say for off-road it's better, less easy to puncture, but you're also going to have a stiffer ride, the tire is going to be heavier, and you're going to have a less comfortable ride. So General went ahead and went with a 6-ply, and I think that's a really, really nice balance of on-road and off-road handling. Of course, that's what they made this tire for. It gives it better fuel efficiency having that 6-ply. The ride is more comfortable than an 8-ply or a 10-ply, and overall it just handles really well. And as far as off-road performance, I've had one pop in one of these tires from a nail. Other than that, zero issues. These sidewalls handle amazingly. So personally, I think they really nailed that balance of on-road and off-road handling. All right, so obviously this being a 40,000 mile review, I've put quite some miles on these tires. And in that time, I've gotten to run these through their paces through many, many different diverse terrains, including pavement, off-road on dirt, rocks, mud, sand, snow, pretty much everything, you name it. So just for a second here, I want to go through each of those different terrains and sort of give you a rundown on how these tires perform in each one individually. Now we're going to start out with the most boring one, which is pavement. It's boring, but it is very necessary to do in a tire review because even with off-road tires, a lot of the time you're going to be spending driving with these tires is of course going to be on road. Now, these tires in my mind as off-road tires score very, very high in all categories for on-road. And my 3 categories are going to be driving comfort, fuel efficiency, and road noise. Now, like I just talked about a little bit ago, General went ahead and they went with a 6-ply configuration instead of an 8 or 10-ply. So that really helps with all 3 of these things. Road noise is excellent, even after driving them for 40,000 miles and not rotating them that well. The road noise is very, very acceptable. Fuel efficiency is great. When I upgraded from the stock 31-inch tires to these 33s, obviously probably the biggest difference was simply the size increase, but for off-road tires they do very well on fuel efficiency. And third is driving comfort. I haven't had a super direct comparison to something with more plies like a KO2 or anything else, but these seem to do very well. Now, talking dirt and rocks, these really shine in that category. This is primarily the terrain that I drive on, is a lot of dirt and rocks and off-road trails like that, and they do extremely well. Many of the trails I don't even air these down, although that's something else I want to talk about, is actually airing these down. Even without bead locks, I'm able to air them down to about usually 12 to 15 psi is what I'll do if I'm doing a big off-road adventure. And with that added traction, these are really pretty unstoppable for all-terrain tires. I've been very impressed. Now, mud is a tricky one because these are all-terrain tires. They're meant to handle good on and off-road, and so they're not going to be super good at one specific thing. So mud is unfortunately one of those things that all-terrain tires, pretty much anyone you get, just isn't going to excel at. And these are no different. I haven't run these through too many scenarios with mud, but the couple scenarios I have, they're just not perfect. And a lot of that comes with simply the width between all these different lugs on the tires. It's just not a mud terrain tire. So are they going to get you through some mud? Certainly. Are they a mud terrain tire? No. If you're going to be doing a lot of mud and mucking and just driving in wet conditions, I would definitely go with something that is a dedicated mud terrain, but for what they are, they do okay. Sadly, the only category that I haven't had much experience with is sand. There's not much sand in Colorado, and I've traveled around quite a bit. I actually got to be on sand a tiny bit in Oregon, but I just haven't had much experience. I think they would do okay. I'm not sure what the best tire for sand would be. I'm guessing probably a mud terrain would do a little bit better, but you can certainly use these on sand, and your biggest tool for getting on sand is actually going to be airing down these tires. So don't take any advice from me on sand since I haven't had much experience, but I think they would do okay. Now, last but certainly not least, especially for me, is going to be snow. And that is a big reason why I got these tires, is because I live in Colorado. It snows a lot in the winter, and I also want to be able to go other places where it's snowy and be able to drive on-road or off-road in the snow and feel comfortable. Are these going to be the absolute best tires in the snow? Probably not. If you want that, you can go ahead and get a dedicated snow tire. But the thing that this does allow me to do is keep one set of tires on year-round, not have to worry about swapping out tires in the winter and summer. So that's really good, is I can just keep these tires on, drive in the summer on-road, drive in the summer off-road, drive in the winter when it's snowing, wet, rainy, whatever. I don't have to worry about it. And as long as you have good tread depth, which I'm starting to run down here a little bit, they really do perform quite well compared to a lot of other off-road tires. Okay, we switched locations again, and it's time to talk about pros versus cons of these tires. And let me tell you, there's not going to be very many cons. Okay, so pros of this tire. They're very cheap. Compared to other tires on the market, honestly, they're among the cheaper ones, but that does not mean they are bad. They are still top of the line tires for being that price. The tires are quiet, like I just talked about before. These tires were built specifically to handle on and off-road and have a very good balance, and they do very well on road. One of my favorite things about these tires is that they are 3-peak snow rated, as well as you can add the studs if you want to have extra beefy snow tires. Like I said, I'm not running the studs. I personally don't like them, but honestly, they are great snow tires just as is. Overall, these tires have worn down quite well. I'll show you some closer up shots of these tires, and I personally have pretty worn down tires and a bit unevenly, but that was really just my fault because I think I didn't even rotate them for the first time until it was like 25,000 miles. So With that considered, they have worn down very, very well. Now, one of the biggest compliments I can give these tires is the new and increased sidewalls from the AT2s. These sidewalls for an all-terrain tire are pretty beefy, and I have to say from personal experience, work extremely well. One of the biggest risks we run as off-roaders is driving through rocks off-road when we're on really remote trails, and that's something that as sort of an overlander camping out adventuring in the wilderness I run into quite often. Many times I find myself out on these trails that are very remote, and if I did pop a tire it would be pretty bad. Obviously I do have a spare, so I could theoretically change it, but changing a tire off-road in those situations is not always going to be the easiest. Over the 40,000 miles that I've had these tires, I've gotten to run them through their paces and especially abuse these sidewalls. A lot of times on trails I'll air down to, like I said, 12-15 psi, where the tire can really start to roll and bend around these rocks. And I'll try to splice in a couple clips here where I put these tires in situations where the rocks are just digging into these sidewalls to the point where I'm a little scared that they're going to pop, but they never have, and they're just totally rock solid. Now, speaking of airing down, that is the last pro I have on my list here, and I've been very impressed as an off-road tire at how far I can air them down without them debeating. I actually have a bit of a faulty pump, so the first time I aired them down, I tried to go down to about 15 psi. That's what my pump read. In reality, they ended up going down to more like 8 psi, and I was running them about 8 psi with no bead locks. With that said, I now run them at about 12 to 15 psi off-road, and even at that psi, they handle excellently. They have a ton of grip aired down like that, and they can really bend around some rocks in some impressive ways. So, good job, General Grabber ATx. Now let's get to the cons, and like I said before, I really don't have many cons for these tires. Honestly, the only con I have is that it's not specifically a mud terrain or a dedicated off-road tire. It is an all-terrain, which basically means that it's a tire sort of intended to be driven on-road and off-road and kind of handle any situation that's thrown at it. So it's not going to handle some specific situations as well as, say, like a mud terrain. Obviously, it's going to do better because it's specifically designed for mud. But with that, if you're running a mud terrain, you're going to get a lot of fuel efficiency lost on-road and many other things. So if you're a crazy hardcore off-roader just looking to off-road and don't care about your gas mileage or anything else, then obviously I would probably go for something like a mud terrain. But for anyone who's just trying to get out there, does a lot of camping, does a lot of road trips, needs these tires to be driven in the snow and everything else, these are some of the best tires I would say that you can get on the market. Alright guys, so I think I've pretty much covered everything in detail that I wanted to, and now it's just time to wrap this thing up and give you a couple final closing thoughts. Like I just talked a bit about, if you are someone who goes off-road all the time and doesn't care about road tripping or anything like that, I would probably go for something more like a dedicated mud terrain. But talking about something in the category of an all-terrain, these are really the perfect tire for you. I haven't had much personal experience being able to compare these tires directly to some of their competitors, like KO2s or Nitto grapplers or anything like that. But from running them down through pretty much their entire life cycle, I've been very impressed in almost every regard. Will I get them again? 100%. I've thought about going to a mud terrain, and it's tempting just for looks and for off-road handling and stuff, but really, I don't think I could ask for any better tire with what I use these for, both on-road and off-road. So I think that's going to wrap up this video, guys. If there was anything I missed or anything I didn't cover that you want to know about these tires, feel free to comment down below, and I'll try to answer those questions as best as I can. But I think I've done a pretty good job covering those, and yeah, these are just awesome tires, honestly. So go get yourself a pair if you want them. I'm not sponsored in any way, but I just genuinely think that these are really good tires. Other than that, stay tuned for upcoming videos. I have a pretty sporadic video schedule. I'm just involved in so many other projects that are not off-road related right now, but I will have more videos coming out sometime in the future, so stay tuned for that, and I will catch you back in the next one.